to hear the sea maid's music?" he says to Puck. "That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid, all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal throned by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts." For more than a century, those lines have been read as an allusion to Leicester, who shot a love arrow at his own vestal, England's famous Virgin Queen Elizabeth, at a pageant complete with dolphin, mermaid, and fireworks. It's less clear how Shakespeare, then a boy 11 years old, could have witnessed the spectacle, or why he would have included it in a play written around 1595, some 20 years after the event. In his book Will in the World, Harvard professor Stephen Greenblatt allows that it is certainly conceivable that Shakespeare's father may have taken him from their home in Stratford-upon-Avon, 14 miles away, to see the display. If so, then perhaps Shakespeare stood with his father upon a promontory overlooking the lake to catch a glimpse of the entertainments. And perhaps the sight made such an impression on him that he remembered it for the next 2 decades. And perhaps he found a moment to work it into a play performed before the Queen, to remind her of her youthful wooing by her favorite courtier. Those are a lot of perhapses. It's not the only explanation, however, for how the Kenilworth water pageant could have inspired Shakespeare's comedy. The playwright could have heard a report from someone who attended, or read about it in a letter circulated after the event. Or there is another possibility. Perhaps another person wrote those lines, someone who attended the event as a guest and witnessed the pageant firsthand. I first heard the name Thomas North in October 2015. I had been invited to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, to give a lecture about a book I'd written about a thief of rare maps. The weather was unseasonably warm, and the foliage was in full array, with a spectacular red maple lighting up the picture window of the library lecture hall. Afterward, the lecture's sponsors, English Professor Emerita June Schluter and her husband Paul, a literature scholar, took me to a dinner reception. Over a pasta buffet, they introduced me to a scholar named Dennis McCarthy, a confident 53-year-old who looked a decade younger than his age. McCarthy had attended my lecture with his adult daughter, Nicole Golovsky, and only later did I learn that the two positioned themselves around the last remaining seats so that I would sit next to one of them. McCarthy immediately pulled me into conversation, asking me about my book and telling me about his own research. "I bet you are the only other person here who knows where the words hic sunt dracones come from," he said. "Of course," I replied. "They're on the Hunt Lennox Globe at the New York Public Library." Translated, "Here be dragons," they are the words cartographers supposedly used to designate uncharted territory. But McCarthy had a different theory, speculating the words marked the location of giant lizards known as Komodo dragons. "Here be dragons" was also the name of his book on biogeography, he told me, and before long we were spiritedly discussing maps and geography. As the reception wound down, he invited me to continue talking over drinks with his daughter and her fiancé. It took me a half a second to decide. I was alone on a Thursday night in a small college town, and the thought of going back to my B&B was infinitely less appealing. I figured I could have a few drinks and continue an enjoyable conversation. I had no idea how this chance meeting would start me down a path to trace a literary mystery that I'd follow, along with McCarthy, for the next 5 years. We headed to the College Hill Tavern, a bar with old sports memorabilia framed on the walls, "Go Leopards," and students and locals drinking liquor from plastic cups. We sat at a chipped wooden high top, straining to hear each other over the impromptu karaoke of nearby patrons. I don't know whose idea it was to order martinis, but amid conversation of maps and Golovsky's impending wedding in the Azores, I was a bit foggy by the time McCarthy finally leaned across the table and told me he had a story for me. "You know how Shakespeare used other sources to write his plays?" McCarthy asked, over the din of amateur Bon Jovi. "Sure," I replied, trying to remember.